Number 1, Jay Mazini. Let's start with a name that once meant generosity to over 1 million people online. Jay Mazini. That was a persona. Behind it was a 28-year-old man from New Jersey named Jabera Igbara, and by the time the FBI was done building their case against him, the same hands that had been filmed handing out stacks of cash to strangers were the hands that had drained millions of dollars out of the pockets of people who trusted him the most. Igbara built his following the way a lot of influencers do, one video at a time. He would walk into fast food drive-thrus and hand cash to workers on shift. He would surprise random people at Walmart checkout lines. He even appeared in a giveaway video alongside the rapper 50 Cent, which only added fuel to his growing fame. To the outside world, here was a young man from an immigrant Muslim family who had somehow made it, and who wanted nothing more than to share that success with strangers on the street. But that image was the bait, not the whole story. While the giveaway videos were racking up views, Igbara was quietly building something else behind the scenes, a company called Halal Capital, LLC. He pitched it to people in his own religious community as an investment opportunity, promising returns through stock trading and through the resale of electronics and personal protective equipment, which was in high demand during the pandemic because he had already proven on camera that he had money to give away. People believed he had money to invest with too. It was a perfect setup. His online fame did the convincing, so he didn't have to. The scheme that actually made him millions ran through cryptocurrency. Igbara approached followers directly, telling them he wanted to buy their Bitcoin at rates well above the market price. On paper, it sounded like easy money for anyone willing to sell. Followers wired their Bitcoin to him, expecting a cash payment in return. Then excuses started. Wire transfer limits, banking delays, processing issues. He always insisted the money was on its way. It never arrived. One investor sent him 50 Bitcoin, and Igbara went as far as faking a wire transfer confirmation, showing $2.5 million had been sent before explaining that away too. In total, prosecutors say he pulled in around $8 million this way, money that funded a lifestyle of luxury cars and heavy gambling. By 2020, cracks were already showing publicly. Online investigators, the kind of internet sleuths who dig into influencer finances for fun, started accusing him of running a fraud when he was arrested in 2021 on kidnapping charges. Plenty of people online were not surprised at all. That kidnapping charge, it turned out, involved a potential witness to his financial crimes, someone he was accused of trying to silence through intimidation. Federal investigators have been building a much bigger case the entire time. At least 4 victims told the FBI they had sent over $100,000 each in Bitcoin, based on nothing more than his promise of a cash payment. Agents traced the blockchain transactions, pulled his messages with victims, and laid out a clear pattern. The same excuses repeated over and over to different people at different times. Eventually, Igbara pleaded guilty. In April of 2024, he stood in a Brooklyn federal courtroom and apologized to the people he had defrauded. According to his own attorney, the court wasn't only weighing the fraud. His kidnapping case was factored in too. He was sentenced to 7 years for fraud, running alongside a 5-year sentence for the kidnapping, with credit for time he had already served since his 2021 arrest. As part of the sentence, he was ordered to pay $10 million back to his victims, a number that reflects both the scale of what he took and the near impossibility of most people ever seeing that money again. The prosecutor overseeing the case, Breon Peace, didn't hold back when describing what made this fraud especially painful. Igbara had targeted his own religious community, people who trusted him because of the shared faith, and used that trust to fund his own excess. Today, the Jay Mazini accounts that once showed off Bentleys and stacks of cash are mostly gone, scrubbed from the platforms that made him famous. What remains is a paper trail in federal court, a documentary that picked apart his rise and fall, and a warning that sits underneath every viral giveaway video online. Generosity on camera does not require honesty behind it. Sometimes it's simply the most convincing kind of bait there is. Number 2, Danielle Miller. Next is a woman whose online image was built entirely on aspiration, private jets, waterside villas, designer bags. Danielle Miller sold envy for a living, and it took a Florida bank manager noticing something wasn't adding up to finally unravel exactly where that money was actually coming from. Miller arrived in Florida during the pandemic in 2020, traveling to Sarasota with a co-defendant named Sierra Blas. What followed was a wide-reaching identity fraud operation that stretched far beyond one state. According to investigators, Miller had built a criminal network that reached as far as Nigeria, where she paid people for stolen personal information gathered through mail theft, phishing attacks, and social engineering scams. With that stolen data in hand, she was able to pull credit reports, driver's licenses, and credit cards belonging to people scattered across the entire country. People who had no idea their identities had been compromised. Once she had access, she didn't sit on it. She drained accounts. She ran up credit cards on luxury purchases. In one case, she rented a waterside villa in Miami for $27,000 a month, all under someone else's name. On another occasion, investigators say she impersonated a Massachusetts woman well enough to open bank accounts and withdraw more than $100,000, then use that same stolen identity to fly to California, check into a luxury hotel, and post photos from the trip like it was simply her life. She used stolen identities to charter private jets and book stays at high-end resorts, all documented in real time on her own social media, where her more than 34,000 Instagram followers had no clue what they were actually looking at. Her spending accelerated as the pandemic dragged on. Authorities eventually estimated she stole around $1.5 million, though they believe the real number could be higher, since not every fraudulent claim or transaction was ever fully traced back to her. Handbags from Louis Vuitton and Gucci, high-end cars, all of it curated and posted, each image adding another layer of credibility to a persona that was, underneath, entirely fabricated on stolen credit. Law enforcement began closing in when they noticed a pattern of unusual benefit claims tied to the same device and IP addresses, applications filed in states Miller didn't even live in, often sharing a mailing address but listing different names. Some of the real victims only found out something was wrong when they received unexpected IRS forms for unemployment benefits they had never applied for. Those complaints triggered a deeper review, and Miller's name kept surfacing. The turning point came when one victim reported unauthorized unemployment claims and opened a formal fraud case. Investigators traced the contact information straight back to Miller, who by that point had left an extensive trail through flights, hotel reservations, and purchase records. When agents pulled surveillance footage from banks and hotels, they saw her using other people's names to check in, make withdrawals, and confirm bookings. Cross-referencing that footage against her own social media posts, matching timestamps and locations to spending records, sealed the case. In August 2021, she was arrested in Florida and charged with identity theft, wire fraud, and access device fraud. As the case moved through the courts, prosecutors described her as someone who weaponized a pandemic, a moment when millions of people genuinely needed help, purely for personal gain. Investigators found she had used stolen identities repeatedly, not as a one-time lapse, but as an ongoing operation supported by financial records, phone data, and physical surveillance, and they noted she kept posting luxury content even while under active investigation. A Sarasota Circuit Court judge sentenced Miller to 16 years in prison after she pleaded guilty to 38 counts of fraudulently using personal identification information. Separately, in federal court in Boston, she was convicted of fraudulently obtaining more than $1 million in pandemic-related loans using the stolen identities of more than 10 people, adding a 5-year federal sentence on top. Investigators have said she used at least 10 identities, and likely more that were never fully traced. Miller herself, after her arrest, described her own life in blunt terms during an interview, calling herself a con artist. Today, her Instagram is gone. Her old followers left with nothing but the memory of a lifestyle that was never actually hers to show off in the first place, and a long list of real people still working to repair the financial damage she left behind. Number 3, Ashley, Ashcast Grayson. Number 3 takes us to Dallas, and to a business coach who once claimed she made $1 million in a single hour. Ashley Grayson, known online as Ashcast, built an empire selling the idea that anyone could replicate her success. What she is now known for, though, is being convicted in a plot to have 3 different people murdered. Grayson marketed herself as a best-selling 8-figure business coach, a course creator who had cracked the code of entrepreneurship and wanted to teach other women, especially women chasing financial independence, how to do the same. Thousands paid for her coaching programs, often handing over hundreds or thousands of dollars for what she promised would be a life-changing strategy. For a while, it worked. Her image was one of faith, hustle, and self-made wealth, and her sudden leap in lifestyle, the designer bags, the luxury homes, only reinforced the story she was selling. Cracks started appearing when former clients began speaking out publicly, alleging that her courses were recycled content with no real strategy behind them, and that refund requests were met with threats of legal action instead of resolution. As the criticism grew louder, one particular critic became a serious problem for Grayson's business, a woman who claimed to have proof that Grayson had scammed people through misleading coaching and fake investment claims. That woman began posting about it, and the pressure on Grayson's brand kept building. According to prosecutors, Grayson responded to that pressure by inviting a Memphis-based influencer she had worked with in the past, identified in court documents as Olivia Johnson, to fly to Dallas to discuss what she called a business opportunity. Johnson and her husband made the trip in September 2022, and during that meeting, prosecutors say Grayson offered to pay the couple to kill a woman based in South Haven, Mississippi, the same woman running a similar business who Grayson suspected of posting fake negative reviews about her online. It didn't stop there. Grayson allegedly also asked the couple to kill her ex-boyfriend, along with another woman who had recently posted negative comments about her online, offering at least $20,000 for each killing. On September 10th, Johnson recorded a FaceTime call in which Grayson confirmed she wanted the South Haven woman killed as soon as possible and offered an additional $5,000 if it was completed within the following week. Later, Johnson and her husband sent Grayson a photo of unrelated police lights, pretending the attempt had happened but failed, then demanded half of the promised fee, $10,000, and traveled to Dallas to collect it from her. A grand jury indicted Grayson and her husband, Joshua Grayson, on a charge of using an interstate facility in the commission of a murder for a hire plot. At trial, Ashley Grayson was convicted and sentenced to the maximum penalty available, 10 years in federal prison without parole. Her husband was acquitted of all charges. The case took an unexpected turn on appeal. Grayson's legal team argued that the FaceTime recording used against her at trial had been obtained in violation of the Federal Wiretap Act, which generally bars using illegally intercepted communications in court. A lower appeals court had allowed the recording under an exception known as the clean hands rule, but when the case reached the Supreme Court, the federal government itself agreed there was no such exception written into the law. In a brief order, the Supreme Court vacated the earlier ruling and sent the case back down for further review. Justice Samuel Alito dissented from that decision, writing that even without the FaceTime recording, overwhelming evidence, including a separate call Grayson made to the FBI in which she described the contents of that same call and admitted she had offered to pay for murder, was more than enough to uphold her conviction on its own. As it stands, the case now returns to the lower court, which will determine whether the recording should have been admitted in the first place, and whether removing it would have changed the outcome at all. Grayson's coaching business is inactive. Her online platforms have gone quiet, and the woman she is accused of targeting is alive and has been cooperating with investigators throughout the entire process. Number 4, Trevor Jacob. Number 4 is the story of an Olympic athlete turned YouTuber whose biggest video ever was also the one that eventually put him in federal prison. Trevor Jacob competed for the United States in snowboard cross at the 2014 Winter Olympics in Sochi, finishing 9th after narrowly losing out on a medal spot. After retiring from competition, he pivoted into extreme sports content on YouTube, building a channel around skydiving, aviation, and adrenaline, and by January 2022, he had grown it to over 100,000 subscribers. In November 2021, Jacob took off alone from Lompoc Airport in a small, vintage single-engine plane called a Taylorcraft BL-65, telling people he was flying to Mammoth Mountain to spread the ashes of a friend who had passed away. Sources at the airport described the aircraft as being in need of major maintenance. Unusually, for a routine solo flight, Jacob was wearing a bulky skydiving parachute, the kind of gear that is awkward and impractical in a small plane with standard seating. The aircraft had also been rigged with multiple digital cameras positioned to capture cinematic footage of the flight, and Jacob was carrying a selfie stick. Partway through the flight, the engine stopped. Jacob opened the cabin door, jumped out with his parachute, and landed with minor injuries. The empty plane crashed into unpopulated scrubland in the Los Padres National Forest. A month later, he released a 13-minute video titled, "I Crashed My Plane." It went viral almost immediately, racking up 1.7 million views before it was eventually pulled from YouTube. Aviation experts and pilots watching the footage started raising red flags almost right away. The video never showed the aircraft controls or engine instruments at the moment the engine allegedly failed. Jacob made no attempt to restart the engine on camera. He never contacted air traffic control. He didn't try to glide toward any of the several visible clearings in the footage. Instead, he bailed out almost immediately, with multiple cameras conveniently already rolling to capture the entire descent. When people online began questioning whether the whole thing was staged for content, Jacob's response was simply that people could believe whatever they chose to believe. 2 days after the crash, Jacob reported it to the National Transportation Safety Board, which opened an investigation and ordered him to preserve the wreckage and hand over his footage. He agreed, but told them he didn't actually know where the crash site was located, despite having personally hiked to and from it to recover his own cameras. Days later, the Federal Aviation Administration opened its own investigation. Investigators later learned that the wreckage had mysteriously vanished from the forest before the video was even posted online, and Jacob could not explain to them why. By April 2022, the FAA had seen enough. They determined Jacob had abandoned the aircraft solely to film its crash, pointing to his early opening of the cabin door, his failure to attempt any standard emergency procedure, and his personal, unsupervised recovery and disposal of both the cameras and the wreckage itself. His pilot certificate was revoked, and he was barred from reapplying for at least a year. Federal prosecutors then took the case further, focused not on the crash itself, but on what came after it. They determined Jacob had staged the entire event as a stunt tied to a sponsorship deal with a wallet company that had backed the video, hoping to boost his channel and earn a commission. Jacob eventually admitted to investigators that he had lied about the engine emergency and that he'd used a helicopter to airlift the wreck to another location, where he later cut it into pieces and disposed of them across several sites over multiple days, all while continuing to tell investigators he didn't know where it was. In May 2023, Jacob pleaded guilty to a felony charge of destruction and concealment with intent to obstruct a federal investigation. He admitted he had intentionally crashed the plane to gain notoriety and to make money. In December 2023, a federal judge sentenced him to 6 months in prison, and he began serving that sentence in January 2024, ultimately being released that June. Prosecutors made a point during the case of noting how reckless the stunt had been. The plane had gone down in a national forest, creating a real wildfire risk and endangering anyone who might have been nearby, and had wasted the time and resources of investigators who initially treated it as a genuine emergency. In an unexpected coda to the story, less than a week after his sentencing, the FAA confirmed it had granted Jacob a new pilot certificate, under the standard rule that allows a revoked pilot to reapply a year after revocation, provided they meet certain conditions, which Jacob had. Number 5. Courtney Clenney. Number 5 is the story of a model who built her following on fitness and glamour, and whose relationship, hidden from the version of her life shown online, ended with her boyfriend bleeding to death on the floor of their Miami penthouse. Courtney Clenney, known online as Courtney Taylor, built a large presence across Instagram and OnlyFans, amassing more than 2 million followers through fitness, travel, and fashion content, often filmed from expensive apartments and exotic destinations. She moved to Florida with her boyfriend, Christian Tobia Bumsley, a cryptocurrency entrepreneur, and online, their life together looked seamless, full of travel photos and celebrated milestones. Behind closed doors, according to friends, neighbors, and later investigators, the relationship was volatile, marked by arguments, breakups, and repeated calls to police at their building. On April 3, 2022, police responded to their luxury condo in the One Paraíso building in Miami's Edgewater neighborhood after a report that Bumsley had been stabbed. He was rushed to the hospital, but died shortly after from his injuries. Clenney was at the scene when officers arrived, her clothing stained, telling police she had acted in self-defense during an altercation, claiming Bumsley had grabbed her by the throat and shoved her against the wall, and that she had run to the kitchen, grabbed a knife, and thrown it at him from around 10 feet away. She was not immediately arrested, and was instead evaluated and released under Florida's Baker Act. The investigation did not stop there. Detectives began reviewing security footage from the building, examining the apartment, and analyzing blood spatter patterns. What they found didn't line up with her account. Surveillance video from weeks earlier, from inside an elevator in the building, appeared to show Clenney shoving and hitting Bumsley while he tried to block her without fighting back. Footage that went viral once it surfaced and raised serious public doubts about who was actually the aggressor in the relationship. Building staff had documented many instances of loud arguments coming from their apartment, with tenants 2 floors above complaining about the noise. Records also showed a prior domestic battery charge against Clenney from a hotel incident in Las Vegas in July 2021. The medical examiner's findings became central to the case. The fatal wound, a stab to the chest roughly 3 inches deep, was found to be far more consistent with a forceful downward strike than with a knife being thrown from 10 feet away, directly contradicting Clenney's account of what happened. On the day of the killing, phone records showed Bumsley had left the apartment and returned around 4:30 in the afternoon with sandwiches for the 2 of them. Clenney made 2 calls to her mother in the following minutes before calling 911 at 4:57 to report the stabbing. On that 911 call, Bumsley could reportedly be heard saying he was dying and losing feeling in his arm, with Clenney heard saying she was sorry. A text message from her mother later that evening referenced self-defense and told her not to speak to investigators without an attorney present. In August 2022, months after the killing, Clenney was arrested in Hawaii, where her attorney said she had been in treatment for substance abuse and post-traumatic stress disorder. She was extradited back to Florida and charged with second-degree murder with a deadly weapon. Prosecutors described the relationship as extremely tempestuous and combative, citing a pattern of domestic violence from both sides, but pointing to evidence that Clenney was frequently the physical aggressor. The case dragged on for years. In early 2024, Clenney and her parents faced additional felony charges over allegations they had improperly accessed Bumsley's laptop after his death, charges that were later dismissed by a judge due to attorney-client privilege violations by the state. After being held without bond for 4 years, Clenney's defense team ultimately reached a plea agreement with prosecutors, in which he agreed to plead guilty and accept full responsibility rather than proceed to trial, with a specific sentencing term scheduled to be finalized in court. Bumsley's family has continued to speak publicly about wanting full accountability, describing him as a soft-spoken man from a strong, values-driven family, and rejecting any suggestion that his death was simply self-defense. Number 6. Austin McBroom. Number 6 is a story that isn't defined by one single crime, but by a long trail of lawsuits and broken financial promises that followed one of the biggest family channels on YouTube. Austin McBroom and Catherine Pais built the Ace family into a channel with more than 18 million subscribers and over 4.5 billion views, chronicling their marriage, their 3 children, and a lifestyle built around luxury homes and viral stunts. McBroom, a former college basketball player, and Pais, a former model, launched the channel in 2016 after the birth of their first daughter, Elle. The name itself came from the first letters of Austin, Catherine, and Elle. Over the following years, the family grew their brand through merchandise, a mobile app, a docuseries, and a wide range of collaborations, becoming one of the most recognizable family vlogging operations on the platform. The most damaging chapter began with Social Gloves, a boxing event company McBroom helped create. He organized and headlined a matchup build as YouTubers versus TikTokers, fighting TikToker Bryce Hall in June 2021. An event heavily promoted with tickets sold and contracts signed promising large payouts to participating creators. After the event, multiple performers said they were never paid what they were owed. Lawsuits followed. Some talent sued for millions. Production companies and vendors said they had been left unpaid after the event underperformed financially. McBroom's own company, Simply Greatest Productions, was sued by its partner media company, LiveXLive, after the event brought in far less pay-per-view revenue than expected, with LiveX's attorneys blaming McBroom for ignoring their marketing advice and underpromoting the fight. McBroom's side countered that LiveXLive had breached their contract and committed fraud by exceeding the agreed budget. Other participants, including Taylor Holder and Nate Wyatt, filed their own lawsuits claiming they had received promised payment, and NBA star James Harden, who had invested in the event, sent legal letters claiming he was owed $2.4 million. The lawsuit was eventually settled at the end of 2021, with LiveXLive agreeing to pay $3 million in owed revenue to the affected participants. Financial trouble kept surfacing in other corners of the family's business, too. The couple's skincare line was publicly accused of failing to pay contracted manufacturers and partners, with allegations that checks bounced or agreements were quietly abandoned after products had already launched. Former employees described being overworked, underpaid, or ignored when trying to resolve disputes. And the family's $10.1 million mansion in Woodland Hills, the same home so often featured in their videos as a symbol of their success, was foreclosed on in October 2021, with public records showing unpaid mortgage bills and unresolved property liens. In 2022, the family also launched Ace Family Fest, a paid festival event described as a mix of Disneyland and Coachella, selling tiered tickets that promised meet and greets and exclusive perks. The event received heavy criticism from attendees who described long lines, overpriced food, and blistering heat, adding yet another entry to the growing list of promises that didn't match what customers actually received. Unlike most of the other cases in this list, McBroom was never charged with or convicted of a crime. His downfall isn't a single verdict, it's a pattern, one lawsuit after another, each one alleging mismanaged funds, exaggerated numbers used to secure deals, and financial promises that were made publicly but never fulfilled privately. In January 2024, McBroom and Pais announced their divorce, and in 2025, Pais publicly stated that McBroom had cheated on her with multiple women during their relationship, allegations he partially acknowledged while disputing the details. The Ace family stopped uploading new content in 2023, and what was once one of YouTube's most consistent family channels has gone largely silent. Its story now told more often in court filings and in new videos. Number 7. Myra Shabazz Khan. Number 7 is a different kind of story than the others on this list, one that centers not on an American influencer chasing views, but on a much darker pattern playing out around the world. One where online trust was used as a tool for exploitation with far higher stakes than money. The pattern described in reporting on this case involves social media figures who present themselves as connectors, people offering job placements, visa sponsorships, and short-term contract abroad, especially in hospitality, entertainment, caregiving, and personal assistance roles. The messaging leans heavily on themes of female empowerment and financial independence, designed specifically to make followers, especially women trying to change their circumstances, feel safe reaching out and trusting the person on the other side of the screen. On the surface, everything about these schemes is built to look legitimate. Applications, interviews, payment plans, contracts, a complete professional feeling package that mirrors what a real staffing agency would provide. Followers trust the person running it because they present themselves with the tone of someone who has already walked that same path and simply wants to help others do it too. According to reporting on cases like this, the reality behind the curated posts is very different. False job listings are used to collect personal data, identification documents, and travel funds from applicants. Some victims are instructed to pay placement fees or visa processing costs directly into accounts controlled by the person running the scheme. Others hand over passports and sensitive personal details, believing their travel has already been arranged. Once that money or documentation changes hands, communication frequently stalls or shifts in tone, with some victims redirected to other people connected to the wider operation. For some, the damage goes beyond financial loss. Individuals who travel based on these arrangements can arrive to find the promised jobs simply don't exist, in some cases finding themselves placed into unsafe environments or pressured into tasks they never agreed to. This kind of pattern is often described by investigators as coercive, using the promise of employment as leverage to maintain control over people who are left stranded, far from home, without support or resources to get back. The people most often affected by schemes like this tend to be young women and immigrants who are genuinely seeking legitimate opportunities, which is exactly what makes the manipulation so effective. Investigations into cases like this typically begin when multiple, seemingly unconnected complaints start surfacing across different states or regions. Some involving identity theft after documents were shared, others involving additional fees demanded after a victim had already committed financially and emotionally to a travel plan. Once law enforcement starts tracking financial activity and communications tied to these operations, patterns tend to emerge quickly: the same names, the same accounts, the same business aliases appearing again, and again across fraud reports. This broader pattern reflects a growing global concern around forced labor and coercive recruitment schemes that specifically target vulnerable communities, using the language of opportunity and empowerment. It is a sobering reminder that not every dangerous influencer operates purely through cash or crypto. Sometimes the most damaging deception isn't a threat at all. It's a promise, dressed up to look exactly like hope. Number 8, Mike Boogie Maljack. Number 8 is Mike Maljack, best known to millions as the co-host of the podcast Impulsive alongside Logan Paul, a role that turned him from a marketing manager into a social media personality with millions of followers across platforms. Maljack was born and raised in Milford, Connecticut, and his path to online fame wasn't a straight line. In his late teens and early 20s, he struggled with a serious addiction to OxyContin and heroin, a period he has spoken about at length, describing arrests, being robbed, driving his car off a cliff, and watching his drug dealer get pistol whipped in front of him. One of the lowest points he has described publicly was failing to take care of his sick grandfather while high on crack. That period of his life came to a turning point in 2010 when his probation officer finally called him out and gave him the opportunity to get into detox and treatment, a moment he credits as the true start of his recovery. After getting sober, Maljack rebuilt his life from the ground up, eventually landing a job as marketing manager for the furniture retailer Lovesac. It was there that he met Logan Paul, according to reporting on their relationship. After Paul's controversial suicide forest video scandal in Japan, Paul brought Maljack on essentially to help manage him and keep him grounded, which led Maljack to relocate to Los Angeles. From there, Maljack became an executive partner and co-host of Impulsive, building his own personal following well beyond the podcast itself, and eventually co-authoring a USA Today best-selling memoir called The Fifth Vital, detailing his experiences with addiction and recovery. Publicly, Maljack has built his brand around honesty about his past struggles and his ongoing recovery, using his platform to talk openly about substance abuse, coping mechanisms, and rebuilding a life after rock bottom. He has also been open about his personal relationships in front of his audience, including a widely discussed relationship and breakup with former adult film performer Lana Rhoades, which is addressed directly in his own videos, clarifying to his audience on more than one occasion that the two remain friends but are not romantically involved. Unlike the other individuals on this list, the information provided here does not describe Maljack as having been convicted of financial crime, of violent offense, or fraud. His public story, as documented, centers on addiction, recovery, and rebuilding a career and reputation from a period defined by substance abuse. His inclusion in a broader conversation about influencer accountability reflects how public figures are scrutinized not only for crimes, but for the honesty or lack of it in the personas they present to their audience. And Maljack's story stands out specifically because so much of his brand is built around transparency about the very struggles that once nearly destroyed his life. Number 9, Tana Mongeau. Number 9 is Tana Mongeau, one of the most recognizable names to come out of YouTube's Storytime era, an internet personality whose channels have collectively drawn in more than 1 billion views since she first started posting as a teenager. Mongeau was born in Henderson, Nevada, and has spoken publicly about a difficult childhood, describing her parents as lacking the parenting skills she needed and saying she felt like she was the one raising them rather than the other way around. She dropped out of high school during her sophomore year and has said she was effectively taken in and raised by her best friend's family starting at age 13 and remains estranged from her biological family. Her online career took off through unfiltered Storytime videos, and she quickly built a reputation as someone willing to say things other creators wouldn't, collaborating with a long list of major names across the platform, and racking up tens of millions of views on those videos alone. In February 2017, she reported that her email had been hacked and used to send a bombing and shooting threat to a Nevada airport, prompting an FBI investigation into the incident. The event that defines her public history more than any other is TanaCon. In May 2018, Mongeau announced she would host her own convention in direct response to VidCon declining to give her featured creator status the year before. She scheduled TanaCon for the same weekend, in the same city as VidCon itself, intending it as a direct alternative, and organized it in partnership with a manager named Michael Weist. The event launched at the Anaheim Marriott Suites on June 22nd, with more than 80 creators scheduled to appear, including major names like Bella Thorne, Shane Dawson, and Casey Neistat. Monjo claimed 20,000 people had tried to attend, a number that exceeded the venue's actual capacity. In reality, an estimated 4,000 to 5,000 people showed up. Attendees described a lack of food and water, standing in the sun for hours, sunburns, and people passing out from the heat. The convention was canceled on the very same day it began, with crowds outside chanting for refunds. The fallout was immediate and widespread. Media outlets drew direct comparisons to the infamous Fire Festival. Monjo publicly apologized and promised refunds would be issued. Shane Dawson released a 3-part documentary series specifically examining what went wrong. It took until May 2019, more than a year later, for VidCon to formally invite Monjo as a feature creator, with co-founder Hank Green publicly admitting he had made a mistake in not including her the first time around. Beyond TanaCon, Monjo's public life has included a widely publicized and ultimately not legally binding marriage to Jake Paul in 2019, filmed for her MTV reality series and sold as pay-per-view content, which the couple later described as something done for fun rather than as a real legal marriage. In 2024, she stated on her podcast that she had a sexual relationship with YouTuber Cody Ko when she was 17 and he was 25, an allegation that, under Florida law, would meet the threshold for statutory rape given the age gap involved. The claim drew significant media coverage and public backlash against Ko, who ultimately stepped back from operations at his podcast network as his channel lost a substantial number of subscribers in the following weeks. Today, Monjo has said she is sober, continues to host multiple podcasts, and has largely moved her career toward music, brand partnerships, and long-form audio content. Though TanaCon remains a single event most closely associated with her name, whenever conversations about influencer accountability and event mismanagement come up online. Number 10, Cameron Herron. Number 10 closes this list with a story that isn't about an online scheme or a planned scandal, but about a single reckless decision made in seconds, one that ended 2 innocent lives and turned an 18-year-old into an unexpected and deeply controversial internet phenomenon. Cameron Herron grew up in Tampa, Florida, and had just graduated from Tampa Catholic High School alongside a classmate named John Barano, only 2 days before the events that would define both of their lives. As a graduation gift, Herron's parents had bought him a 2018 Ford Mustang. On May 23, 2018, Herron and Barano were driving separate cars down Bayshore Boulevard, a scenic waterfront road in South Tampa, on their way to a local gym. According to witnesses and later evidence, the 2 teenagers were racing each other, weaving through traffic at extremely high speed. At the same time, 24-year-old Jessica Robinot, visiting Tampa from Ohio with her 21-month-old daughter Lilia, was crossing the street near a pedestrian ramp toward West Knights Avenue. They weren't in a marked crosswalk, but they still had the right-of-way given their location. Herron's Mustang struck them. The vehicle's black box data later showed he had been traveling at 102 miles per hour in a zone posted for 40, only reducing speed rapidly in the instant just before impact, evidence of hard braking that came far too late. Jessica died at the scene. Lilia died in the hospital the following day. Both Herron and Barano were charged with 2 counts of felony vehicular homicide. Herron chose to enter an open guilty plea, meaning he left a decision on his sentence entirely up to the judge rather than risking a jury trial. During the proceedings, prosecutors presented evidence that Herron had a documented history of extreme speeding, including a reported incident of hitting 162 miles per hour on Interstate 75, which weighed heavily against him. In April 2021, Judge Christopher Nash sentenced him to 24 years in state prison. Barano, who had not been driving the vehicle that struck the victims, negotiated a plea deal for 6 years in prison followed by 15 years of probation, a deal that was reviewed and approved by the Robinot family themselves. Even though Herron was legally an adult at the time of the crash, the Mustang itself was registered in his mother's name, which opened the entire family up to civil liability. The Robinot family ultimately received at least $6.4 million through a civil settlement, a combination of direct payments from both families and payouts from multiple layers of insurance coverage. The financial weight of that settlement reportedly forced the Herron family to sell their home. What makes this case stand apart from a typical tragic accident is what happened after sentencing. Clips of Heron in court, quiet and visibly emotional, spread rapidly across TikTok and Twitter, and an enormous, largely young audience began treating his case less like a criminal matter and more like a piece of entertainment. Hashtags calling for his release trended repeatedly, with some accounts openly commenting on his physical appearance rather than the facts of the case. Researchers who studied the activity noted that while some of the support appeared to be genuine, a significant portion showed signs of inauthentic, bot-driven amplification. By July 2021, TikTok content about Heron had crossed 1.7 billion views. Over 100,000 tweets had been posted referencing him, and a Change.org petition asking for him to receive another chance in court gathered more than 28,000 signatures. His mother has since described much of that online attention as an unhealthy obsession rather than genuine support. Heron's legal team has made repeated attempts to appeal or reduce the 24-year sentence, arguing it was excessive compared to Barano's. But Florida's appellate courts have upheld it every time. In 2025, a new defense attorney began post-conviction relief proceedings on his behalf, seeking further review of the case. Whatever sympathy his appearance generated online, it doesn't change what actually happened on Bayshore Boulevard that day. A mother and her 1-year-old daughter, simply crossing the street, were killed by a decision made in a matter of seconds. Two families were permanently altered, one by grief that will never fully heal, and the other by consequences that will follow a young man for the next 2 decades of his life, viral fame or not.